Okay, hey guys, I'm back. Yeah, I took a hiatus off of YouTube for almost about, a year and a half now. Okay, let me just check to make sure everything's working. I think everything's working. Let me double check. Okay, I think everything's working. So, I just want to do a little reaction to Catherine Whiteford's statements. She was in D.C., I think last week. The UOJ, Union of Orthodox Journalists, they were there, and there was a huge gathering of Orthodox Christians in D.C. and trying to defend the Ukrainian Orthodox Church from persecution, and especially because the recent comments made by Representative Joe Wilson of South Carolina regarding the Orthodox being, Russian agents and spies, all this nonsense, ridiculous stuff. So let's just play Catherine's speech real quick.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. My name is Catherine Whiteford, and I serve as the Director of Government Affairs for the Society of St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. And I also serve in the role of co-chair of the Young Republican National Federation. And I am honored to be with you today for what is difficult but a necessary conversation, one rooted not in geopolitics but in human dignity and religious freedom. Let me be clear at the onset about why we are here and why we are not. We are not here to speak against the people of Ukraine, who many of us have supported and prayed for throughout this brutal war. Many here today are Ukrainian, nor are we here to defend Russia. We are not a pro-Russia group in any sense of the term. We are here for one reason only, to defend the universal principle of religious liberty and to speak plainly when that principle is abandoned, even by governments we otherwise support.
Okay, so basically that was that little snippet of her speech. So, Catherine, she's doing a great job. She's a great person. I recommend y'all follow her on social media. She's a great person. She's doing a great work, and she's part of the Society of St. John of Shanghai. Some of y'all probably already heard this many times, especially if you're Orthodox, that St. John's Shanghai, he was a great saint, and he reposed in San Francisco. So, yes, but regarding the speech, it was actually not bad. Yes, we're supposed to defend religious liberty. We're supposed to defend religious rights, especially here in this country. We have our First Amendment, which guarantees our constitutional right to believe whatever we want. And, by the way, being brainwashed is also your constitutional rights, defended by the First Amendment, by the way. So there's that. But I feel like claiming that you're not a pro-Russian group, well, they're not. And, it doesn't matter if you're pro-Russia or pro-Ukrainian, and if you're defending the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, you're going to be labeled a Russian bot, no matter what you do. Like, you could claim to be pro-Ukrainian yet still defend the Orthodox Church, and the enemies are still going to claim that you're a paid Moscow agent. And I'm saying this is sort of like a weakness that our side has, is the fact that we're not clearly saying who's a good guy and bad guy in this conflict. Like, we're just trying to kind of stay neutral and say that we're just trying to defend the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We're not taking sides here. We're not pro-Russia. And you don't have to be. Like, no one has to be pro-Russia, pro-Putin. Like, you don't have to be any of that at all. No one has to. But at the same time, you could at least acknowledge that in this conflict, there is a good guy and a bad guy situation. Because our enemies, they do have a good guy, bad guy scenario in their head. Then our side is trying to kind of pull off this neutral thing, and it's actually a weakness because, we're not addressing the real issue, because this did not start in 2022. Zelensky did not wake up one day, oh no, Russia's invading us, oh, let's just persecute the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This started in 2014. And sometimes I do have a question for a lot of my fellow Orthodox Christians here in the States. I was a Protestant in 2014. I was a hardcore Protestant. And I visited the Donbass in 2014. I visited Ukraine. I'm from Ukraine. And there were apparently Ukrainian people at that meeting in D.C., which is good. My parents are from Ukraine. My ancestry is from Ukraine. Like, not all of it, but a good portion of it is from Ukraine. I still have family in Ukraine, particularly Western Ukraine, the heart of Ukrainian nationalism. And there's still a good guy, bad guy situation here. Ukraine is the bad guy. I'm sorry. This might sound offensive, but I'm sorry. Ukraine is the bad guy in this situation because Russia did not trigger some random persecution of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Russia's invasion did not trigger that. It was already there, just in smaller doses. In 2014, there was a literal genocide going on in the Donbass. I went to visit to see what's really going on and confirmed that we're being lied to in the West. There's a literal genocide that the Ukrainian government has been committing against their own citizens and against the Orthodox Christians, not just in the Donbass. So let's forget about the Donbass for a second. Let's focus on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church as a whole. The UOC-MP, the persecution already started like on a micro level at first. And then it just started to get worse and worse every year in northern, southern, western, central Ukraine, all over Ukraine. It was happening. Particularly, mostly in western Ukraine, where they're totally anti-Russian in that region. Although it depends, if you're in the Carpathian Mountains, they might be pro-Russian. There were literal churches being attacked, priests being attacked, forced out of their parishes, and being replaced by either Ukrainian Greek Catholics, who are, by the way, heretics, because they're not Orthodox, they're Roman Catholics, just of the Eastern Rites, or they would be replaced by an unrecognized cult called the Kiev Patriarchate, which is recognized in 2019, but in 2014, 2015, they were not recognized. And this would happen throughout Ukraine. The seizure of church and land, it did not start in 2022. And so, like, my issue that I have with a lot of the fellow Orthodox here in the United States, because I was a Protestant at the time, but even back then I understood like a lot of the situation that was happening. And in 2018, 2019, the persecutions got worse, especially when, well, before I go into 2019, let's just go back to 2014. A lot of this persecution did not just start with the Maidan of 2014, the so-called revolution. And this was a coup started by Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Victoria Nuland. Our American government did this. Our tax dollars started this. It wasn't Zelensky just waking up and saying, yeah, let's go hardcore persecute the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. No. Like, it wasn't Russia's invasion of Ukraine that triggered this. Our tax dollars in 2014 triggered this. So the persecutions were happening all over the country. So in 2018, 2019, around that time period, you start hearing about the EP, the Ecumenical Patriarch, Bartholomew. He starts to recognize the so-called OCU, a bunch of schismatic heretics who all of a sudden became recognized as their own Ukrainian church, right? The Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which again is not even recognized by, currently, from what I understand, by most jurisdictions at least. So in 2019, the persecutions just ramped up. They got bigger and bigger, yet silence, literal silence from most Orthodox in the United States. Yeah, like, and then Russia, like Russian people, Russian bloggers, Russian journalists. By the way, Russia and Ukraine, they were not at war. From 2014 up until early 2022, Russia and Ukraine were not at war. Russian journalists, Ukrainian journalists, they would cross borders. Ukrainian employees who worked in Russia, they would just go into Russia. Obviously, they would not cross the Donbass border because it's a little dangerous to go through there. But vice versa, Russian and Ukrainians would travel back and forth, back and forth. A famous Russian vocalist, Radio Topak, he had fans in Ukraine. He would go into Ukraine like almost every year. He would do tours in Ukraine. And then in 2022, he had to figure out a way to escape back into Russia, which he did. He's back in Russia now, singing, doing his tours. But prior to the invasion, Ukraine and Russia were not at war. The Ukraine government was actively speaking out against Russia. I'll move my camera right here. So, but ever since the EP recognized the OCU, the persecutions escalated. Still not as bad, but they escalated. And people just saw it. Now, the Serbians, I'll give credit to Serbians in the United States, they noticed this. Like, they noticed what's going on in the Donbass since 2014. Since 2014, American Serbs, Serbian Orthodox, and I was still a Protestant, like when I came back in 2015 back to the States, I was surprised how the Serbs were hardcore, anti-Ukraine, because they remembered Yugoslavia. They remembered what the Democrat Party did. They remember what the U.S. government did under Democrat leadership, under Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. They remember that. Like, they remember Yugoslavia. And they saw the fake revolution in 2014. And so at least the Serbian Orthodox were still aware of what's going on. Unfortunately, even a lot of ROCOR folks, just ignorant. Either ignorant or just not really saying anything. So the only major conflict that was happening in Ukraine was in the Donbass. So from 2014 to 2022, an 8-year civil war, mostly a stalemate. And it's just simply, like most of the war from 2016 up until 2022 was just Ukraine bombing and bombing and bombing every day. The cities of Donetsk, Lugansk, Gorlovka, Snezhnoye, and other towns. And for 8 years, things got worse and worse in the Donbass. When the KUF-19 hit the whole world, the Donbass was in a very bad situation because they had to shut down their border with Russia. And they're isolated for real. They were already isolated before, because Russia didn't really do much to help the Donbass, no matter what people tell you. Again, this is my criticism of Russia right now. Russia literally abandoned the Donbass for 8 years. And not the Russian people per se, but the Russian government abandoned the Donbass for 8 years. They knew what the Ukrainian government was doing. Now, of course, the Russian government will constantly talk about Minsk II Accords, how Ukraine should follow them, blah, blah, blah. Ukraine always violated those accords. And the Russian government just kept insisting that, let's just talk, let's just have a conversation. For 8 years, the people of Donbass felt betrayed because they They saw what happened in Crimea. They thought, okay, well, we're going to do the same thing. It was all happening in a matter of months in 2014. In 2014, the people of Crimea, they basically rebelled against Ukraine, saying that they don't support the Maidan revolution. The Russian government immediately took advantage of that situation. They annexed Crimea because, honestly, what a lot of people forget, that had Russia not stepped into Crimea, then the civil war in Ukraine would have been bigger. It would have been in Crimea, and maybe with the help of Crimean rebels, the Donbass rebels would have probably totally crushed the Kiev regime. So you could say that Russia saved the Kiev regime by simply annexing the Crimea. There's a lot more nuance to this. There's a lot more deep geopolitical nuance, and it will take forever to discuss this. But the thing is, the people of Donbass thought the same thing, that if they do the same thing, that it would be just like Crimea. Russia will send in troops. And at the time, around February, March 2014, Russia had a chance to take over the Lugansk region and the Donetsk region. Just a few hundred troops with the help of local rebels, boom. And Ukraine would have left the Donbass alone. That's it. There would not be any civil war. There would not be any bombings in the Donbass. The Donbass would have been part of Russia, just like Crimea is currently. Unfortunately, the people of the Donbass were not given the same privilege as the people of Crimea were. So for 8 years, the Donbass rebels were fighting, and Donbass leadership, the politicians, they were bad too. They're not really the best people in the world, but still they're representing the will of the people, the will of the Donbass people, the will of the Donbass rebels, which they knew, as bad as and corrupt as the Donbass rebel leadership was, they're like local politicians. They also knew that those same soldiers, those Donbass rebels, will turn on them instantly the moment they betray the ideals and values of the Donbass people. So the Donbass leadership had to basically play along and basically keep insisting that, they're trying to secede from Ukraine, and they did. They did secede from Ukraine. In 2014, in May 2014, well, the Donbass residents decided, okay, well, we're going to take advantage of our Ukrainian constitution, and we're just going to... there were shootouts and skirmishes all over that region already by that time, but still no all-out war. And in the regions and especially in the major cities like Lugansk and Donetsk, they had their elections. They voted. Majority voted. There were three options: either join Russia, remain in Ukraine as a very autonomous region within Ukraine, or just completely secede to be their own independent nation. The vast majority chose the first option, and on that day of the elections, or the day after, May 11th, May 12th, 2014, Ukraine started using airplanes to bomb residential buildings, residential areas. And that kind of inspired more people to join the rebels. More and more people, coal miners, teachers, taxi drivers, doctors, police officers. Yes, a lot of the police officers joined the rebels too. So for 8 years, this was happening. And this was happening because our government started a revolution, an illegal coup, an anti-democratic coup in 2014. I'm a monarchist. I don't really care about democracy. I don't. But the people who claim to want democracy, love democracy, I kind of find it interesting how they never apply it to Ukraine or the people of Donbass. And so there was a anti-democratic coup in 2014 that our tax dollars paid for. You saw Victoria Nuland walking around with those cookies. And like basically she's pandering to the Ukrainian people, because Victoria Nuland, she saw the Maidan revolutionaries for who they were, just a bunch of children who are not smart, they're low IQ, so I'm going to pander to them with cookies. That's the level of this, that's how much she disrespected the people of Ukraine. That's our government representative. Our government representative was there in Ukraine handing out cookies because she disrespects the people of Ukraine. So, for 8 years, the people of Ukraine are being massacred. People of Donbass have been massacred, murdered by the Ukrainian regime. Our ally was murdering its own citizens for 8 years in a row. And there were Orthodox Christians in Donbass, and the UOC was there in the Donbass, and I actually went inside one of the temples, and yes, the clergy was definitely on the side of the rebels too, because they saw what the Ukrainian government was doing. I walked around the city. I walked around the ruins. I saw the ruined houses. I saw the residents living in the basements. President Poroshenko. This is not Zelensky. This is President Poroshenko. He attacked people of Donbass, saying, our kids will go to school. Their kids will stay in the basements. And he stayed true to his word. He made sure that their kids stay in the basements. But people of Donbass, they still went to school. They still sent their kids to school just to prove him wrong. And they proved him wrong too. So, fast forwarding to 2022, we act like this is just some random persecution that happened. And the thing is, the persecution happened way before 2022, way before Russia invaded. Russia eventually invaded because they kind of had to, because they are also a political power. They have their own political interests. And Putin, since 2008, has been saying, do not let Ukraine join NATO. That's already, we're going to lose, people who are culturally close to us. You're already separating a brotherly nation. Two brotherly nations. Well, historically, they're not just brotherly, they were one nation until the communists came. So even recognizing Ukrainianism, yes, and I say this as a person with Ukrainian ancestry, that Ukrainianism is actually communistic. The whole idea of Ukraine is communism anyway. I don't care how anti-communist Ukrainian nationalists were in the 1940s, in 1918 through 1920s, the fathers of those Ukrainian nationalists were hardcore commies. They were hardcore commie bastards who murdered Orthodox Christians back then, throughout 1918 up to the 1920s. So I don't want to hear it from the Ukrainian nationalists saying they're anti-communist. Maybe today you are, but then again, your tactics are communistic anyway. You're still using communist tactics. And so what I'm saying is that it doesn't really matter how much we say that, we're neutral and we're trying to support the rights of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Our enemies are still going to claim that we're Russian bots, Russian agents, Russian spies, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Yes, I have family in Ukraine. I have relatives in Ukraine. And so, but Ukraine is the bad guy here. We have to definitively proclaim that it's not just Zelensky by himself, it is the whole system in Ukraine. They must stand trial. The whole government system in Ukraine is rotten. There should be a war tribunal, and Ukraine should not be our ally. There's no vital interest for us. Ukraine is an enemy of the United States. They're not an ally. Ukraine is an enemy of us. They're our enemies. They don't share our values. Especially if you're a conservative American, regardless if you're Orthodox or Protestant or Catholic. If you're a traditional conservative American, you'll never declare Ukraine to be our ally. They're not. Especially morally speaking. Especially when young Ukrainian men are actually fighting on the front lines, while a lot of their women are actually in the States, they're in Western Europe, they're in other countries, living as refugees, living with other men, hanging out with other men while their boyfriend, their fiance, their husband is risking his life for them. On top of that, in the early stages of the war, when Russia invaded, for some reason, our media never showed videos of entire Ukrainian military units just walking over and surrendering to the Russians. Ukrainians themselves, like a huge portion, don't really want to fight for Ukraine because there's no reason to. A good portion of Ukrainians don't want to fight for Ukraine or defend Ukraine. So yes, when Russia invaded Ukraine, sure, the persecutions escalated. Only then you noticed. That's when you noticed. But we all noticed when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, but not during the 8 years. So this was not just some random event that happened because of Russia invading Ukraine. This happened a long time ago, before Russia's invasion. It just only kept growing and growing. Sure, Russia's invasion kind of escalated the whole situation. But also, it's not just the persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's not just 8 years of persecution that has been ignored by currently a lot of the people who are standing up for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church here in the States, which is good. It's good that this is being brought to light, but for some reason we're focusing on 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, but a lot of us are not focusing on 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18. We're not focusing on those years. We're not focusing on that persecution. And also, aside from the persecution, the murder and genocide of civilians, women, and children, which I witnessed when I was there. I witnessed that. I witnessed what your tax dollars, my tax dollars were doing. Our tax dollars were doing this. I witnessed what was happening. I come back a year later. I'm told, oh, you don't know anything. You do not see anything. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not some mainstream journalist. You're not some expert. My personal visit there did not mean anything, I guess. Okay. But it's not just me. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are living it for 8 years. For 8 years in a row, people are living it for 8 years. A lot of Donbass women are crying into the cameras, telling the Ukrainian people to talk to their government leaders, to convince them to make a peace with them, make peace with Donbass, to let them go, to do something, to have some sort of peace. What the Ukrainian citizens say, not all, but many Ukrainian citizens would respond, well, it's your fault and you're all going to pay for this. Yeah. Ukrainian bloggers, journalists, a lot of this stuff can be found on YouTube. Those bloggers and journalists, they would literally say how Donbass has to be cleansed, ethnically cleansed, regardless if a Donbass resident is of Ukrainian origin, Russian origin. That didn't matter. It didn't matter. Despite the fact that even in the Donbass, there were pro-Ukrainian people. It doesn't matter. Journalists, bloggers, and Ukrainian citizens, civilians, they were saying that Donbass has to be ethnically cleansed, completely cleared. Not just like Like, not just Russians, anyone who lived there, anyone who was legally a resident should have been wiped out, and then eventually new citizens would just come in and move in. That was being promoted on YouTube, on other social media platforms, by journalists, bloggers, and civilian Ukrainians. So to a certain degree, I don't have sympathy for a lot of Ukrainians, despite my origins being from there. Despite that, I saw those video clips. I saw the call for genocide. I witnessed the genocide. And even when I left, the genocide continued. The call for genocide continued for 8 years. They were laughing at the genocide. For 8 years, things got worse, and worse every single year for the people living in the Donbass. Every single year it got worse. Less people started going to cafes. Less people started going to movies. Less people stopped enjoying life. Less people started going to work. More and more people were dying of hunger for 8 years. More and more kids were being blown up by bombs, sponsored by our government, by the way. It started off with Obama, and Trump did help Ukraine a little bit in 2019, so there's that. So we should also call out ourselves, our own politicians, our representatives. We're guilty of this too. Especially when a lot of us were silent. Well, I wasn't silent. I came back immediately and started telling people what happened. But to the other Orthodox, who have social media, they have internet, they definitely should have known about this. Yet no one spoke up. Why is it this year? Why is it now? It's a good thing that it's being brought up. But why are we talking about this now? And why are we only focusing on the recent event, on the recent conflict? Also, as Orthodox Christians, we should realize that, eventually, when we believe, we know that anyone who messes with God's people, with innocent babies, God will eventually punish those people. In the Old Testament, anyone who messed with Israel, they got punished. In the Old Testament, whenever Israel would go astray from God, God will punish Israel. When the kingdom of Judea was being disobedient, who did he send? He sent Babylonians to come to take over the kingdom of Judea. So for 8 years of genocide of innocent women and children, many who were Orthodox, so if you include the persecutions that were happening throughout the whole country of Ukraine, combine it with the genocide that's been happening in Donbass, all done by the Ukrainian regime, regardless if it's Poroshenko and later Zelensky. You guys really think that God just ignored all that? That eventually, 8 years later, God answered the cries of the victims of the Ukrainian regime, and he sent in the Russian government, the Russian military, to finally punish and avenge the people who were being murdered by the Ukrainian government, the people who were being persecuted by the Ukrainian government prior to Russia's invasion. We should also realize that this is also a punishment. Ukraine's being punished by God for the evils and the crimes and the war crimes that it has been committing for 8 years in a row. I remember a priest said that, yes, in the Donbass, people were no longer having any actual good luxuries at all. Nothing. There was no more luxury. But the Ukrainians, for 8 years in a row, they would go to their cafes, go to their restaurants, go to their movies, go to work, and they lived as if there's nothing bad going on in the country. They ignored the persecution for 8 years of their own church. In 2019, the OCU was formed, persecutions escalated. Still, a lot of a lot of you people in the West were silent. Around 2019, I basically mentally started to convert to the Orthodox Church. 2020, I got baptized. But even before that, I was wondering, like, how come no one's talking about the persecution of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine? Yet somehow Russia's invasion is what triggered this revelation, I guess, which opened y'all's eyes. But yeah, again, we're focusing only on Zelensky for some reason. We're not focusing on Poroshenko. We're not focusing on the Maidan government that existed before Poroshenko was elected. We're only focusing on Zelensky. So yes, I had to kind of let this all out. Just let you guys know that this did not start in 2022. This did not start with Zelensky. This started before that. This was something that was basically eventually going to happen. And Ukraine is definitely not our ally, especially if they're trying to drag us into a war that serves no purpose for us, no interest. There are no interests for us, unless we want some sort of resources from Ukraine, which again, Russia will have, we won't. Also, there is a good guy, bad guy scenario here. Like, Russia's not intentionally destroying Ukrainian Orthodox churches. The Russian government is not persecuting the Orthodox Church. Ukraine is. Russia's not. So there is a good guy and bad guy here. Ukraine is not the good guy. Ukraine is not a good guy. Ukraine is our enemy. They should be declared our enemy. They're an enemy of the United States. They're an enemy of any normal country. And Ukraine is not a normal country. And we should view this as a punishment. When the Bolsheviks murdered Saint Tsar Nicholas and his family, God's anointed, you think there was no retribution? There was. 30 million civilians and soldiers dying in World War II. The German invasion of the Soviet Union. 30 million Soviet citizens, soldiers, civilians, all of them, dying in the Second World War. So, Ukraine committing all the crimes they've committed for 8 years in a row, you think God just let them go unpunished? The Ukrainian church being persecuted, God's anointed being persecuted by a secular regime. And innocent babies being murdered and slaughtered every day for 8 years in a row. You think God just ignored all that? As imperfect and as bad as the Russian government can be, you don't think God did not use them? God did not prepare them for an invasion to punish Ukraine? To let some of the Ukrainian population feel what the Donbass residents were feeling for 8 years in a row? I'm always on the side of innocent civilians. But at the same time, where were all of you when the Donbass civilians were being murdered? I'm on the side of all civilians, all innocent people. I'm on the side of all innocent women and children, no matter what country they're from. I'm always on the side of innocent civilians. But a lot of you are not. There's a lot of people out there who are not on the side of civilians. They don't care. They just want it to be right. Like they just want their side to be right. They're not right. I'm for the truth, and the truth is that Ukraine should not be our ally. Ukraine is an enemy of the United States, and that should be addressed more often. So I appreciate the work Catherine does. I appreciate the work EOJ does. I appreciate the work that Society of St. John does. But I say we should go deeper. We should straight up say that Ukraine is bad. It's bad for the Ukrainian people. And I say Ukrainian people, I'm talking about the Ukrainian residents, citizens of Ukraine, because Ukrainian people is a communist innovation anyway. Yes. And I will constantly say, yes, my ancestry is from Ukraine, but Lenin created us. We have no true historical roots. Prior to the revolution, our ancestors were Russians, not some fictitious Ukrainians that Lenin and his Bolsheviks created. My father, despite being a Protestant, he lived in the Soviet Union, and Protestants were also persecuted in the Soviet Union. But persecution, I mean, like they were not allowed to keep certain jobs, not allowed to do certain things, because you have to be an atheist to do certain things. But my dad would tell me that Ukraine would always be worse than Russia in the Soviet Union regarding regarding secular life, regarding other stuff. Ukraine probably was a great place to live compared to Russia. But when it came to religious freedom, Russia actually surprisingly had more freedom for Protestants than Ukraine did. And my father would tell me how, like basically even like the Soviet authorities the Russian authorities under the Soviet Union, they like would not be able to kind of, let's say, pin something on some preacher. So if they find out that he's going to travel to Ukraine, they'll simply contact the Soviet authorities in Ukraine and tell them, oh, by the way, this so-and-so is traveling, so try to see if you can get something on him. And the Ukrainian authorities would oblige, because they were a lot worse. The persecution of Protestants was literally a lot worse. And not just the Protestants, of course, Orthodox in general, but Ukraine was a lot worse when it came to persecuting religious people in the Soviet era. Now we have a post-Soviet era, the so-called anti-communists. Anti-communists are using communist tactics to persecute God's church right now in Ukraine. The labels have changed, but the tactics remain the same. So, yes, Catherine, keep up the good work. You're doing a great job. I just think that we should also recognize our role as American people, as our government. Our government also contributed to this persecution. So Representative Joe Wilson and other politicians, who ignored Donbass situation for 8 years, the persecution of the whole church in general in Ukraine for 8 years, that issue has to be addressed. Like, we must simply just wash our hands. Like, basically the best way to walk away from this is just to say, you know what, we don't need Ukraine as our ally. We should just kind of let it go and not worry about Ukraine being our ally. We should call them out. We should let them know that we morally protest, but we should definitely not have Ukraine as our ally. There's no vital interest for us. Of course, there's a vital interest for the corporations like BlackRock. There's a few other corporations that already made deals with Zelensky. The Zelensky government made deals with Ukraine to sell Ukrainian land. So, even if, you don't have to be pro-Russia, you don't have to be pro-Putin, but at least Russia's not selling off people's land to foreign corporations. At least the Ukrainian people that are currently living under Russian occupation, they're living with full rights as Russian citizens. They have full rights, complete rights as Russian citizens. If Ukraine wins in this conflict, then BlackRock and a bunch of other corporations, they're going to take all that land in Ukraine. Ukraine would just become a plantation for foreign corporations. Corporations that don't care about Ukrainians. They hate Ukrainians. The current Zelensky regime hates Ukrainians. The Ukrainian government always hated Ukrainians. So we should never refer to them as our allies. They're not our allies. Ukraine is our enemy. Because the same deep state that wants to subjugate us here at home wants to subjugate the people of Ukraine too. All right. So yeah, I'm going to finish this broadcast, and like I said, like I just said, great job, Catherine. Keep up the good work, and let the world know what's really going on over there.